Hi, everybody. We've just got still a couple of people connecting to audio. We'll just give it a minute or so. Right, so I think we can kick off. Looks like we've got everybody in. Let me just admit this one from the waiting room. Hi, everyone. This is the National Coastal Wetland Conservation Grant webinar, and I'm Helen Rain, the Hawaii Conservation Coordinator for Pacific Birds, and we have a team of people who are going to be speaking today. So we have Chris Swenson from the Fish and Wildlife Service, Afsheen Siddiqi from DOFAW, and then Butch Haase from the Molokaʻi Land Trust, and Sara, Bowen from Alakoko Fish Pond, Mālama, Hulēʻia. I'm just going to do a super quick introduction to Pacific Birds, just in case you are not familiar with us, and then I'll hand it over to Chris. So Pacific Birds is a joint venture, and they're actually joint ventures across the whole of the US. We all work in the same way, basically by building partnerships and then trying to connect partners with what they need to build capacity. We have a particular focus on wetlands in Hawaii, wetlands as nature-based solutions, helping to deal with climate change. That's one of our focal areas. And we're also interested in indigenous agriculture as a habitat for birds. This is a picture of our team. So we're a very small team with a very enormous geography. So we are very focused. And in Hawaii, it's just on wetlands and water birds. Next slide, Chris.
There we go.
All right. So I don't need to tell the audience here how many challenges our teeny water birds face. They're obviously enormous and pretty unique, but we also are pretty convinced that recovery is possible. So that's really our focus. We're looking at where we can find those places where wetlands work for people and for water birds, and kind of find that nexus to put all of those things together and make sure we recover our water birds and protect communities at the same time. Couple of ways we're doing that at the moment. We have a wetland workshop coming up, predator and wetland workshop, April 16th to the 18th. So I will put in the chat the link to that. The early bird registration finishes 1st of February, and abstracts are due then too. So take a look at that link. It'll be a big workshop and definitely an important event for wetlands in Hawaii. And we also have our strategic plan coming out. So look out for that. That's the strategic plan for wetlands. Chris, I will hand over to you.
Okay, very good. So my name is Chris Swenson. I'm with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, coming to you from sunny Oregon today. And I'm a grant manager for coastal wetland grants. These are Fish and Wildlife Service federal grants, and the area I cover is Pacific Islands, Oregon, and Washington. And today's workshop is basically just going to be to familiarize you with what these grants are, how they might help you, and maybe acquaint you with some of the folks that you need to talk to if you're interested in pursuing one of these grants. And then at the end of today, we'll also have a time for question, answer, discussion, things like that. Feel free to ask questions as we go through, although just bear in mind that we will also have time at the end as well. So we'll do this as a tag team. I'll go through the first part of it, then Afsheen Siddiqi from DLNR will talk about the state's role in this process, and then we'll have Butch Haase and Sara Bowen talking about their experience as subrecipients for coastal wetland grants that they've already received, and kind of give you a sense of what's involved with that. So this is what we're going to cover today. Just an overview of the program, the people that can help you, the process and timeline for this year for how things are going to work. A little bit about the scoring criteria. These are nationally competitive grants, so you have to compete against all the mainland folks when you're putting in your proposals. A little bit about project match, and then how you go about demonstrating that your project or proposal is actually ready to fund. Then Afsheen is going to talk about the DLNR process and what happens after the grant is awarded. Butch and Sara will talk about their experiences with these grants. And then just to wrap it all up, we'll have a little bit of summary and then the discussion and question and answer period. So Hawaii's been pretty successful in the past. This program's been around for 30 years or so. These are the locations for all the grants that Hawaii has had in the past, and some of them are currently ongoing as well. So about $19 million of federal funds since 1993. And it's, as far as we know, this grant program is going to continue rolling on into the future too. So it's something that we hope is going to be around for years and years, and something that you'll be able to take advantage of. Okay, grant program overview. So one thing that's really important to realize that people often get confused about is that this is a federal grant to state agencies. So only state agencies can be the actual applicant and receive these grants. So for Hawaii, that means it's got to be DLNR, either Division of Forestry and Wildlife or Division of Aquatic Resources. Kirk actually did get one because they're part of DLNR, but it's got to go through the state. They need to be the ones that actually apply for the grant. But it's very common that the state is going to want to have sub-grantees to actually do the work, like land trusts or NGOs. So for those of you that aren't part of the state, just realize that in order to get this grant, you have to first talk with DLNR and make sure that they're willing to sponsor you for the grant, apply for it, and manage the grant, even if you're going to be doing the work itself. Typically, there's about $16 to $20 million per year that's available nationwide. There's a $1 million federal fund cap. This hasn't raised up in over 30 years, and we realize that with inflation, $1 million doesn't go nearly as far as it used to. We're looking at potentially raising that in the future if we can, but for at least this coming year, it's still going to be a $1 million cap for the amount of federal funding that you can get. The things that these grants can do are acquire and restore coastal wetlands. So you could acquire fee simple or conservation easements to protect the wetlands, could do restoration for the wetlands, and some grants actually do a combination of both. And so for what we mean by coastal wetlands, that includes marshes, estuaries, marine intertidal ancholine pools, seagrasses. It's all basically all the wet stuff along the coastline. In terms of match, it's a 25% non-federal match, but that's a percent of the project total, which is a little confusing as well. So if you add up the amount of federal money you get plus your match into one total, you take 25% of that, and that's what the required match is going to be. Okay, there's a couple things that this program cannot fund. So if there's legally required mitigation, if someone is on the hook to, you know, make good for a wetland that they fill in or something like that, we can't fund that. And likewise, we can't fund creation of wetlands that never existed before. You can't make new wetlands with this grant. There needs to be at least a 20-year benefit. We can't fund sort of operations and maintenance type stuff, year-to-year type things. There needs to be a longer-term benefit for this. There's also a cap in terms of the amount of educational activities that you can fund. We do encourage education as part of these grants, but it can't be more than 10% of the total. And then likewise, if you add up all the design, compliance, and monitoring costs, that cannot exceed 30% of the grant total. Pre-award costs are sometimes okay. Pre-award costs are costs that you might incur before the grant actually starts, like if you wanted to do an appraisal for a property or something like that, or you wanted to get some environmental design, engineering design done before the grant actually starts. That can be okay in some circumstances, but you just need to check with us first and see if we can work it into the schedule there. Another thing that folks sometimes get confused about, you know, with all these federal programs and grants and agencies, the acronyms and start to sound alike. So just remember that we're talking about National Coastal Wetland Grants today, but those are different from NAWCA grants, which you might have heard about as well, and also come from Fish and Wildlife Service. And those in turn are different from the coastal wetland or the coastal program. If some of you know Sheldon Plantovich with the coastal program in Honolulu, she runs a great program there, but that is actually different from what we're doing here today. So just try and keep all those terms straight. And one of the main things that we really want to emphasize in today's presentation is that unlike some other grant programs, we really do encourage discussions and early drafts. There's some programs that actually say, you know, we don't want to talk to you. We just want to see your application. We take really the opposite approach to that. We want you to turn in the best application possible, make sure it fits with the program really well. So we encourage you to talk with all of us and then also to turn in drafts as well. As you'll see, if you get into some of the criteria, these aren't necessarily the easiest grant proposals to draft. And it really does help to have some pointers on how to maximize your points and how to express yourself so that you can get the best possible score. And we'd really like you to talk to us about all that. So here's some folks who can help. Number of us are on the call today. For DLNR, it's Afsheen Siddiqi with DOFAW and Anthony Olegario with DAR. They are actively managing grants right now. They have experience sponsoring these grants and working with us. So they'd be great contacts for you. Within Fish and Wildlife, there's myself, and then Sheldon Plentovich, I mentioned, who's with the Coastal Program. And then Helen, of course, with Pacific Birds, who's been very generous with her time in offering technical assistance. And Helen, is it correct that this whole presentation will be available for folks afterwards? Are we going to post that?
Yep. Yeah, we're recording it and we'll put it on our website and anywhere else where you'd like it to be.
Okay, great. I should have made that point up in the beginning. There's a lot of information in here, but don't worry about getting all of it down because it will be available for you afterwards. This is just to kind of give you a flavor of it, but this will be available after for you to take a look at as well. Okay, process and timeline. So for project development, site visits, conversations all year. Don't wait for these things to be announced officially. Some of the best grant proposals actually take a year or two to actually pull together. So just contact us at any time with ideas. And the more we talk about it, the better. The request for applications, the official request is going to be published in grants.gov end of this month or early February. So keep an eye out in grants.gov or contact one of us if you're not comfortable with that website, and it should be out. For any of you who have applied before, it's exactly, or not exactly, but very, very close to the previous year's proposal. So not much is going to change at all. So one thing that you really need to keep an eye on if you're not part of DLNR is DLNR's request for interest. And Afsheen is going to explain what this is, but essentially if you want to be a subrecipient on a DLNR award, you need to get your application in for this, put in your request for interest, which comes out January, February. It sounds like it's due in April. Is that right, Afsheen? And then what'll happen then is for any proposals that DLNR does want to submit or does think are a good fit for this year, they're going to send in drafts to me for review around April 29th. And that's where we really get down to brass tacks and talk about how you can improve your proposal and how you can improve your scores and things. But we really would like to see a good solid draft by April 29th. Then I'll get comments back out to DLNR by May 22nd. And then these are all going to be due officially on June 21st. So that's when the finals need to get turned in. And then the award dates for announcements, it varies every year, but approximately January 2025 is when you could expect to hear whether you've gotten the grant or not. Yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the scoring criteria right now. There's a whole document on that you need to look at, but just to give you sort of a general sense of the things that we're going to be looking at. There's wetland types and percentage. Obviously, there needs to be some wetlands on the property. Usually the more, the better in terms of scoring points. The duration of benefits, I mentioned it needs to be at least a 20-year benefit for the project. And then if you can increase that number up, that helps you out as well. Species that are present are a huge part of the scoring as well. So threatened and endangered species, bird life, aquatic species, you want to have good species lists pulled together for your application in terms of what's there on your property and what's going to benefit. How this grant helps to implement coastal conservation strategies that are already out there. That's another big part of it. Contaminant reduction, which can actually include invasive species as well as just junk and debris that might be on site. How much this project catalyzes future conservation as well. That's a good consideration to put in there as well. Partnerships are important. If you do have contributing partners, just remember you need to get letters from them that specify the dollar amount that they're going to be contributing. Any additional non-federal cash match. Remember I said the basic requirement is 25%, but if you can get up above that to closer to 30%, that'll get you extra points. And then if there are compatible education and recreational activities that fit under that 10% cap that I mentioned before, that'll get you points as well. And then there's kind of a catch-all category for other things that includes climate change benefits, unique habitats, cultural values, etc., things like that. Okay, so in terms of maximizing your application scores, these two documents at the top, they're not fun to read, but you really do need to read them. It's the grant announcement that I mentioned is coming out at the end of January. It's really important to read that all the way through. And then the ranking criteria for points are in federal regulation. It's called 50 CFR Part 84. We can get you copies of that as well. There's a lot of fine print there, but it really does tell you what the points are given for and specifically how you get them. So that'll just be an important thing to go through as well. And again, discuss your project ideas early with both DLNR and with us. Some projects fit really well and others don't. They might be better for other grant programs, and there's no point in spending time on a project that's not going to score well. So talk with us early. Let us know what your ideas are. And if we can fit in a site visit, we'll do that as well. It's always great to meet people and see what's on site. And then send in those drafts for Fish and Wildlife Service review as well, when we guarantee that's going to improve your score. So it really is worth your time to do that. And as you write this, remember, again, it's a nationally competitive program. A lot of the folks who will be reading your application are on the mainland and they may never have been to Hawaii. So assume that they have no knowledge of what Hawaii is like or what the conservation issues are. And just make it easy to read and easy to understand as much as possible. You can also organize your information into tables. That makes it really easy for folks to see what sort of information you've got, what sort of species you have on site, etc. And sort of assume that people are going to be reading these things at the last minute. They're not supposed to be, but they may be reading them on the plane to the ranking meeting. So just make it easy for them to find the information. There are page limits on this, but there's no page limits on the appendices. So include plenty of photos and maps. That really helps people to understand what your project is about and what you're doing. Another thing that you need to do is include a wetland map with the National Wetland Inventory categories for wetlands. We've got a little illustration at the bottom of what South Molokaʻi NWI map looks like. So this is available online. It's kind of the default that you can use to go to make a wetland map. But if you have better wetland surveys, by all means use them, because these NWI maps, they were done a long time ago. They're done from aerial photos. So if you have actual ground truth surveys done by a certified wetland surveyor, it's absolutely fine to use those as well. But you will need to come up with some kind of wetland map that shows what you got on site. Okay, we've already talked about project match a bit, but just to go over it again, it's 25% of the project total is what you're required to come up with. It needs to be non-federal cash or in-kind. The exception to that are the Department of Defense REPI grants. Now, even though that's federal money, it actually counts or can count as non-federal match. So it's just what Congress said, so that's the way we're going to go with it. If you are able to get REPI funds, that can be used as match for your grant. In-kind match can include volunteer time, use of equipment, land values, bargain sales of land, etc. If you are going to use volunteer labor, you need to document that, what the labor rate is, and you also need to keep timesheets, etc. We can give you all the details on that as well, but there is documentation required. Sara has dealt with that quite a bit, so she might have some things to say about that. And then the match has to be necessary and reasonable. It's sort of a term of art. It basically just means that it's got to actually help you. It's got to be related to the grant. You know, it can't be a piece of land that's 50 miles away that you're using as match. It has to be something that's necessary and reasonable to achieve the grant objectives. And then I did mention that you can get additional points for additional match. So if you can come up with non-federal cash, and it has to be cash, can't be in kind, that's over the 25%, then you get an additional up to additional 5 points. And usually you max out when you're at about 30% of the grant total. Okay, now this is really important. It's a little bit of a wordy slide here, but it's basically just trying to drive home the point that, you know, be really sure that this is something you're ready to go with. You want to have a really firm plan in mind. You want the landowners to be on board. You want to know what's coming up in terms of your permitting requirements, et cetera. Have a detailed budget. All these things are really important to show that this project is ready to go. Because sometimes people will get really excited to get a grant and come in maybe a year or two before it's really ready. It doesn't hurt to just wait until you have things really lined up and ready. And ways you can kind of show that readiness are having specific quantifiable objectives with lots of details, a timeline that shows you can ideally do this in 2 to 3 years, although we can potentially do extensions, but we don't generally like to. Willing sellers from landowners, if you're talking about acquisition, restoration plans and designs for restoration, show that you have a good understanding of what the permitting and planning requirements are to make this thing really happen. Demonstrating that you have the long-term management commitment and capacity. And again, with a good budget, and make sure the community's on board, the landowners, and just a general understanding of what you're getting into. Okay, and here's Jim Jacoby giving you the 2 thumbs up after you've gotten funding for your theoretical grant proposal here. And so now the question is, what happens after that grant is awarded? So the award letter gets sent from Fish and Wildlife Service to DLNR. Then DLNR starts all its internal processing and agreements, which Afsheen is going to talk about in just a minute here. And then there's environmental compliance. That all has to get done before you can get the thumbs up, before you can really get on the ground stuff started. If you're talking about land acquisition, there's a whole series of things that need to be done for that as well, including due diligence, yellow book appraisals, which is officially the way that the federal land acquisitions have to work. We require that specific type of appraisal and appraisal review, and a number of other things, especially if you're doing a conservation easement.
Getting in on.
Sorry? Was that a question or just okay? Anyway, conservation easements are out there as well, and that's an excellent way to go, but that does also include some additional work that needs to be done in terms of baseline inventories and management plans. Amendments are possible to a grant after it's awarded. It could be to extend the duration, extend the scope, change the budget, etc. And then, of course, there's annual and final reports that need to be submitted as well. So now, Afsheen, please take it away and tell us what happens on the DLNR side after these grants are awarded.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah, so that was a great introduction to the grant and the purpose of the grant. And as Chris had mentioned, DLNR is the entity that is able to receive these grants, but we also understand that there are a lot of good wetland projects that are out there that our partners are working on and want to implement. So we go through our process to be able to transfer the funds from this grant from DLNR to any partner that's interested in doing wetland restoration type of work. And so that process is called a request for interest. And so what we do is that allows us to, it's our state procurement process that allows us to receive funds from a federal grant and then transfer the funds easily to a subgrantee. And so that request for interest, we usually put out as Chris mentioned, once the notice of funding opportunity comes out from Fish and Wildlife Service, we immediately try to put that RFI as soon as possible after that announcement comes out. And then the deadline, as Chris mentioned, is a little earlier than the actual grant deadline from Fish and Wildlife Service. And the reason we do that is for two reasons. So we have the deadline in April. We want to see what proposals are out there and interested parties. And we want to be able to get that opportunity that Fish and Wildlife Service provides to provide comments and evaluate these draft proposals. So we ask for the deadline before Fish and Wildlife Service asks for those draft proposals. Since that's going to be in April, our deadline will be in April as well, but earlier than the draft proposals will be needed to be handed over to Chris. And the other reason is because these grants are, DLNR is asking for these funds, we're kind of on the hook for whatever the project proposals entail. And so we want to make sure that, it fits within the mission of DLNR as well, and that we have confidence that this proposal can be completed. And so we want to work very closely with partners that are interested in applying for these grants. And so that earlier deadline than the actual final grant proposal is for that reason, that it's in April. And then, so then once we turn in the grant, we wait until Fish and Wildlife Service announces what grants are awarded. And so our RFI process, we wouldn't award the RFI until we find out that we received the grant. So that once we get a notice of award from Fish and Wildlife Service, then we can award that request for interest to the partners. So it's a slightly, it coincides with the Fish and Wildlife Service process, but it's a little bit different. And then the results of, that procurement is either going to be a contract, a subgrant agreement, or some kind of purchase order that allows us to transfer funds over to a partner that is doing the work. Okay, next slide, please. So once we put out the request for interest, it follows really the same kind of evaluation process that the grant notice of funding opportunity has. So we evaluate based on the same kind of criteria that Fish and Wildlife Service will evaluate, but you need to look at that request for interest to see what other things that we want to see in that proposal. And that includes things like control of the property, which we want to know, like if a partner is interested in doing restoration work but doesn't own that property, then what kind of agreement do you have to control that property? And the minimum, as Chris had mentioned, is we want to see that there's at least 20 years of management control over that property, and that there's a guarantee that that work that's going to be conducted is maintained over that 20-year period. We're interested to see that the project is feasible. We want to know what kind of experience a partner has doing this type of work so that we're confident the work can be done. Clear program objectives, and then a clear budget as well. And then the next slide, Chris. And then the kind of the last thing I did want to mention, and this is a kind of a long list of types of compliance work that is related to wetland restoration work. And I'm just putting that here. I'm not going to go through any of this, but just to be aware that wetland restoration, we want to see a lot of really good wetland restoration occur in the state, and we want to help that happen. But just keeping in mind that you are aware of the kind of compliance that a lot of these types of restoration projects have to go through, and being prepared to do that compliance. And so some of this can be budgeted in a grant application, but there needs to be significant restoration. I think Chris mentioned like up to 30% in the kind of compliance design and monitoring can be included in your proposal. So you need to be aware of what the type of compliance that needs to happen before the actual on the ground work can occur. And we can help, go through that process, but it's really needs to be kind of spelled out in that proposal as well, that there's an awareness of what that compliance is required, and that there's a plan on how that compliance will be completed.
Just a quick example. sorry to interrupt, but a quick
No.
example might be like archaeological surveys. That's really common to see people budget that into a grant proposal.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so I don't want to overwhelm people with that, but I just want people to be aware that that exists and that there should be a some kind of thought process and discussion in the proposal on how this compliance work is going to be addressed. And then I think that was my last slide, and I just wanted to introduce, you know, we've had a lot of good partnerships through this grant program, and luckily we have two people here that are able to kind of share their experiences working with the state. And so I wanted to just give a brief intro of the two speakers. So our first speaker is going to be Butch Haase, he's the founding executive director of the Molokaʻi Land Trust. And their mission is to protect, restore land and cultural resources on Molokaʻi. And we're currently working with him on purchasing a wetland under this program that would be really beneficial for wetland protection on Molokaʻi. And then our speaker after him, who we've also worked with extensively, is Sara Bowen, who's the executive director of Mālama Hulēʻia, which is a nonprofit organization on Kauai. And their mission is really to remove the mangroves around the Hulēʻia River and reestablish the native wetland ecosystem in that area and promote environmental stewardship, honoring our Hawaiian values. And we've worked with Sara on a grant that's been completed to restore part of the wetland there. They successfully removed 26 acres of mangrove and planted 14 acres of native vegetation. And that grant was received and closed successfully. And now we're working with on a second grant under this program to further restore the hydrology in that area. But I'll let them speak to the program and their partnership we've had with them.
All right. Hey, thanks. Thanks, Afsheen. And I just want to introduce myself. I'm Butch Haase. I'm the executive director for the Molokaʻi Land Trust, and we worked very closely, with Chris for I'd say about coming up on 15 years now, and with the state for equally as long. And Pacific Birds has been just a critical partner for us. More recently in helping establish the new Molokaʻi wetland partnership here on Molokaʻi, which led to this acquisition between ourselves and our fellow partners on that partnership. So this is our first National Coastal Wetland grant through Fish and Wildlife Service and the state. And, we're still in the process of getting to the release of funds and moving forward with the actual priority grant activities. One of those is the acquisition, but there's other aspects of it as well, including hydrological assessments to help determine the restoration of this site going forward, as well as some education and outreach stuff within the community in the visioning and planning process for the restoration plan. So I guess right now I don't have as much experience, maybe as some of our other applicants have gone through this process, but I can say that be prepared for a timely process depending on who your matching funds are through. We got county open space funds, and as a result, both the state and the county will co-hold the conservation easement on this. And one of the interesting lengthy processes we're working on right now is, Corp Counsel at the county and the Attorney General at the state having two different ideas what that conservation easement should look like. And so, that can add a considerable amount of time and legal expense, from our side, having our attorneys help kind of moderate all this to help get this thing moving forward. So, just be prepared for if you're using it for a land acquisition process. And for those of you, I saw some folks here from Hilt and stuff, familiar with land acquisition timelines. they can take several years. It's never just a quick and easy process to close on this. Even if you've got a willing seller letter, matching funds, and are ready to go, there are additional hurdles that present themselves along the way, and they always increase the timeline over what you best anticipated it to be in the end. So on top of that, we're just in that. I would want to go back and maybe have Afsheen talk a little bit more about that timeline process for release of funds through the state, because she mentioned a little bit about the sub-grant easement agreement and the conservation easement development, but there's another part of the process where we need to have, once all those things are prepared, then it goes through some administrative steps at the state where the governor has to do final release of funds before this can happen. And Afsheen, do you have any idea about kind of what additional timeframes that we should have applicants be aware of in regards to that process for releasing those funds? Because, as in our case, we're fronting costs for a lot of the legal, for the acquisition, and you need to be prepared to have those funds up front to cover those, even though that for us it's in the grant to be a reimbursable amount. Until those funds are released, you don't have access to those funds. But oftentimes you need to be moving through these legal processes, to keep that land transaction process going. So, Afsheen, do you have any idea about that additional time frame we should let people be aware of?
Certainly, thanks, Butch, for that. Yeah, so once the states receive a grant from Fish and Wildlife Service, we do have to ask the governor to release the funds so that we can set up an appropriation within the state. So, there is a time lag, I guess, between the time that the funds are awarded and then that we actually have it available to spend. So, once we have an account set up, and then, all the paperwork, the fiscal paperwork that has to be done for that, it takes, I would say, 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly we can get that processed. Yeah, so there is definitely, don't expect, certainly once we get the grant award letter from Fish and Wildlife Service, doesn't mean the funds are available right away. There is that time lag for us to get the funds set up within our system, and then we can go through the process of either contract or whatever that agreement is that we have with the partner.
Cool, thanks, Afsheen. Yeah, you get that initial grant award letter and you're like, woohoo, and then that it wears off over time. But it's a really important tool for these types of acquisitions, to have a specific fund just for these coastal wetland projects available means that, for us as a land trust, having additional pools of funding for acquisition so that you don't always have to burden, 1 or 2 pools for all of your acquisition projects is really critical. For spreading out the impact for land conservation in these types of realms. So other than that, I would just say just be prepared for a long and patient process in going through all of this. We're right now at the point of just getting ready to do initiate the Yellow Book appraisal, do the baseline documentation for the conservation easement, and hopefully get the draft conservation easements finalized and agreed upon by both the state and the county entities. So that's where we're at right now in our process.
Just to emphasize what you were saying, Butch, thanks a lot for that. That was very helpful. These costs are reimbursable, all the things that Butch was mentioning, but the issue is, again, that they're reimbursable. So you got to pay them up front. So you got to have the money available and be able to wait to get reimbursed, but you can put it all in your budget. So that's the good news part of it.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll just add, they're only reimbursable if you include them in your budget.
Yep, that's why you have to really think about your budget. Put in your admin costs, put in your environmental compliance, your appraisal, all your legal costs, things like that. Make sure it's all in there.
Okay. I think that's it for us. Thank you, guys.
Okay, Sarah, you're up.
Okay, well, thanks. And hi, everybody. I'm Sara Bowen. I'm the executive director for Mālama Hulēʻia. And like was mentioned before, we've completed one National Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant program, removing 26 acres of mangrove from the surrounding area of Alacoco Fish Pond. And after that successful completion of the grant, we went ahead and applied for a second one and are in the process of the award being made. And so I can say that is you do want to have a good sequence of your project, and the environmental compliance really thought through, like was already mentioned, but I can say from experience, everything takes longer than you expect it to. And so you do need to make sure to include those time buffers into your timeline. And one of the things that we're experiencing is that working on somebody else's land and then needing to have all of the agreements in place to do environmental compliance work and all of those necessary steps on someone else's land, which is then somewhat out of your hands in terms of the time frame and timeline. So I think having everybody at the table that's involved in the project, whether they're doing the work or it's on their land or going to be a third-party contractor, to have them all at the table as early as possible so that everybody understands the requirements and the time frames, so there aren't any surprises, because inevitably, even if you do all come to the table early on, the timeline will somehow seem to stretch on and on. Let's see. I took a couple of notes. I was gonna just from listening to some of what Chris and Afsheen were saying, I thought it was important, if possible, to get that site visit early on, because it really helped us to have had everybody come and look at the site so they know what you're talking about when they're reviewing your draft proposal. It just helps everybody to have buy-in from the beginning. So if you can schedule that and schedule it early, that's great. One of the things that really helped us in putting our first proposal together was to be able to review another organization's successful proposal that had been successful a few years prior to our application. It just helped to give an idea on how to lay the information out, because they do ask for a lot of information, and it can be a little overwhelming to get it all put into the page limit documents. But I did find, coming around the second time that we did the application, trying to work from my first draft actually almost made it harder. And so I would suggest maybe trying to do a first draft of all of your own information, project information, prior to looking at a different organization's format, because sometimes it can actually make it harder to try to massage the two together. Let's see. Chris, I had a question for you that I thought might be helpful for everybody, and that is, when it comes to the 2-year project, I can't remember what you called it on your slide, but I know in our first project, we called it project longevity. And there were some criteria to go along with that, which it did seem like kind of a strict criteria, but in the long run, that's what got us access to be able to do the work at Alacoco Fish Pond, because it had been privately owned. And it was that 20-year longevity piece that that got us a 20-year long-term lease agreement with the landowner to do the stewardship of Alacoco Fish Pond. So that actually turned out to be a really good tool, but it seems like maybe the definition of that 20-year term has changed a little over the years. Is that, could you speak to that a little bit, Chris?
Not really changed. I mean, there's a couple things. There's a in order to even qualify, you need to be able to guarantee that whatever benefits are from your project are going to continue for at least 20 years. Then you get points, additional points, if you can show that it's, you know, up to 100 years, I think, or 100 years plus, and that's sort of defined as in perpetuity.
Right.
So something that might automatically qualify for that would be a land acquisition where fee title is being acquired. So that's going to be forever, right? So that usually automatically qualifies for the extra points and is considered in perpetuity. Where it gets a little more gray is for restoration projects. So that's where you sort of consider what type of restoration it is, and then also the management capacity and commitment to continue, you know, especially if it's something like mangrove removal or any kind of invasive species control. Obviously, they're going to be coming into your site forever. So you really need to kind of demonstrate that your project and your organization has the longevity and the will and possibly even a maintenance fund of some sort set up as part of their organization to continue that work. So that's really what we're looking for, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. I thought that would be helpful for everybody to have a better understanding of how to address that in the application. And I guess what I wanted to do is really be open to questions, because I want to make sure that what we talk about for the rest of this time together is what people are really wanting to hear more about. Does that sound okay, Helen?
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I would just invite everybody who's on the call. This was the space for everyone to talk about project ideas, get some feedback from Chris and Afsheen, Butch and Sara. You know, it's an opportunity for us to bounce ideas around and for everybody else to listen in or put their feedback in as well. So, you know, feel free to unmute.
Let me just run through the last couple of slides really fast. They're just summary slides, and then we'll get to the conversation. And I know that we're running short on time, so I'll just do this really quickly. Again, just, you know, provide detail, demonstrate feasibility, make sure you understand what you're getting into in terms of time and effort, and put that into the budget. Environmental compliance is really important. Involve us early. More upfront preparation, the better, and make sure that everyone is really on board, including your community and whatever landowners you're either working on their land or if you're thinking to acquire their land. Believe it or not, we've actually gotten proposals where people hadn't talked to the landowner first and they said they wanted to buy the land. That didn't go over so well. So just make sure that you've checked all those boxes before that. And then again, just a real quick summary. You know, the purpose of these grants: protection and restoration for coastal wetlands. DLNR is the applicant, but they can subaward. Got a $1 million cap with 25% required match. Recap of the timeline here: drafts by April 29th, finals due June 21st, awards announced early next year. And again, just contact us early, please. And that's it. So now, rest of our time is definitely questions, project ideas, however you would like to spend the time.
I love Hobbs' photos, you guys, on all of the slides. Boy, she really gets some good ones, doesn't she?
Yeah.
They're amazing. Yeah. And she's really generous in sharing them as well.
Well, one other thing that I didn't mention is, and I almost like to keep it a secret, but I think the secret might be out of the bag, is that Helen is a really great support person in helping to review grant applications. So don't hesitate to reach out to her, because she's really good, fast, and efficient and helpful. So thanks, Helen, for all of your help over the various things that you worked with us on.
And I will back that up 100%, Sarah. Yeah, critical. I do see Keahi Bustamante on here, and I just want to just talk about doing site visits and bringing in the state and the feds on these projects early. Keahi did some of the invertebrate surveys for us and found one of the I think we had the orange-black damselfly on site out there, which was one of the T&E species on there. And so, I just want to point out that we have these types of resources available when you enter into these types of partnerships to help assist you in getting those really ranking criteria documented to help you really rank well in the national level. So I just saw KI on the list here, and I just wanted to point that out. So
yeah, and I'll just echo that as well. It really helps when you have on-site surveys that have been done, and that can actually count as part of your match as well. Getting a certified biologist on site to do the surveys, because if you just sort of say, well, we know birds are sort of around this vicinity, that's good to know, but it's a lot better to know. It's like, well, we documented 6 gallinule nesting on site last year. I mean, that carries more weight. So the more on-site surveys you can get done prior to application, the better.
I just keep thinking of, oh,
real quick. In addition to the birds, there's also listed damselflies like Buchan, as well as just get a specialist who can look for things like that too, as well as plant species.
Yeah, and fish too. Helpful to know what fish are there.
Yeah, and the category says fish, but actually it includes other aquatic species as well. So, invertebrates kind of get the short end of the stick as usual, but we try and compensate for that by saying you can include the aquatic ones under fish, and then there's also sort of a other species category you can put those guys into as well if they're not already listed as threatened and endangered.
I think the other thing to say is having written one of these grants is it's definitely not one that you can bash out, 3 days before the deadline. It requires a lot of upfront consultation. It's a very detailed application. There's 3 main parts to it. It's big, and we can send you examples of what's gone for both of the grants that Sarah had and Butch's grant, as well as others. But the upside is that because you get the support from Chris and Afsheen and the team, I think applications stand a good chance of success if you get past both of those application procedures, the state one and then the Fish and Wildlife one. So it is worth going for it. You just have to be prepared to put the work in.
yeah, in fact, I would say as soon as maybe even look at last year's RFP and start using last year's as the outline, because I think it's probably pretty similar again, to just start really drafting out what you might want to put into this year's. And then as soon as the RFP comes out, take it seriously and get as far as you can, and take advantage of I like to call it the friendly review that Chris offers from his office, because that really helps you to identify where the reviewers are focusing their efforts in that competitive process. And also that, I can just say that we had a successful grant. I went after the second one and I didn't meet the deadline. I had to wait another year in order to get that second grant proposal finished because it was just a little bit too much work for me to accomplish in the amount of time that I had to work on it.
I'll agree that the friendly review at Chris's office really helped us with our proposal, getting it dialed in to the place it needed to be to get the ranking that got it funded. So yeah, make sure that you include the time for that part in the process, because that was critical.
And make sure you pay attention to the ranking because it is a national competition. So it's highly competitive.
And one thing we haven't really talked about so far before is, you know, for both Butch's and Sara's grant, there's a strong, really important cultural component to that. And not all the mainland grants have that. So that's something that we need to express carefully or express well in the grants, because again, the mainland reviewers, they might not have seen this, they might not understand how, you know, kalaloi might actually benefit a bird, or having some agricultural activity might even fit in with wetland conservation. And that's something that there is data for. It can be expressed, but because it's different for mainland folks who are comparing this to, you know, very different types of restoration proposals, it's important that we kind of talk about that first and figure out the best way to express it. Because bottom line is these grants are for coastal wetland restoration and restoration of habitat for coastal species. But obviously, you know, cultural components can fit in there, but we still need to show that it meets the basic intent of the original grant program. So that's just a good thing to talk about early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll just add that, especially, you know, I mean, for us on Molokaʻi in particular, but I'm sure throughout the state, you know, having that cultural component is critical to having community buy-in to these types of projects. And that's the other aspect that the reviewers are looking for, is that community buy-in aspect. So fortunately for us, it means that, you know, we have that cultural component to tie that all together. And oftentimes, as Chris was saying, it's not a scoring item in a lot of our competitors out on the mainland. So be sure to emphasize that strongly in your application.
Okay, well, we've got a couple more minutes. I mean, I'll stay on for a little while if folks want to talk. And again, if you got ideas, contact us early, talk to us. We're here to listen.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the partners on the call today, and a lot of the partners that we have that dialed in for all the support on this and other projects that make all this conservation possible. So just mahalo, everybody.
Yeah. Same here. Same here. And also I offer, if anybody wants to reach out and ask questions off this call, feel free. Helen has my email address and happy to communicate beyond this call here.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop recording, but we'll hang around, as Chris said, if anybody wants to ask any questions or talk about project specifics. So we'll wrap up the webinar as a whole and stop recording, but you're welcome to stay on or to contact us, as Sara said.